Okay. Actually, I think I've been really amazed by listening to different speakers from different contexts, and I think I was like saddened by listening to the context in Kenya, because when people start speaking about having like moving to proper online teaching in the UK already, I think most of you know that in the UK we do already have the online education as part and parcel of most of the university teaching. So I'm going actually to be a bit. Can you see now the backdrop of my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, then. So the higher education institution response to COVID-19, and by my presentation, I'm mainly focused on the global north, because I know at other universities, the situation has been qualitatively and quantitatively different. So the hybrid teaching, it already exists within the West, but now the move has been literally to online education for most of the courses. And basically here in Scotland, we have frequent lockdowns. So students were nearly unable to go to university since March. So both the synchronous and the asynchronous modes of teaching delivery, they exist. And there has been massive behind the scene digital and technical supports for educators and academics to transfer the teaching mode, but also particularly academics. I'm talking about younger generation, older generation. They spend huge amount of time to adapt to the new normal vis-a-vis the digital derivative courses. Now, my focus is principally on students. The effect of the new normal on students. And this ties to an extent to Professor Michael's presentation about the fact that there is no or limited face-to-face interaction with students with the new normal now. And there has been a shift nearly, I'm talking about the University of Edinburgh and the School of Education, because this is my context, to the flipped classroom context. And by the flipped classroom context, basically students has to do a lot of reading and preparation, and they will have also to go over tasks and homeworks and to submit them online. And then they will watch the recorded video or audio lecture. And then they will have the opportunity either for a synchronous or asynchronous mode of workshop, whatever they agree with their tutor or educator. And there is also a lot of self-paced learning now. Instead of having working groups like students learning and teaching groups, students are requested and expected to do a lot of self-paced learning on their own. Now, what is the importance of face-to-face interaction? And the research interest about the importance of face-to-face interaction actually has been is dated to the Vygotsky's theory of sociocultural interaction within learning, and the importance of this theory that has started in psychology to children learning, but then it has also been implemented to different types of teaching and learning across like primary school, secondary school, and also at university and community education, the importance of interaction of the social experience to the learning and the teaching experience. But the recent interest in the face-to-face interaction actually is dated to the eruption or the beginning of the transnational education. And most of us are aware of what is transnational education. There are a lot of definitions of what transnational education means, but basically students will be based in a certain geographical space, like say Singapore, and they would be receiving their undergrad or postgrad degree from a university, say in Australia or in the UK or in New Zealand. So that is transnational education. In these particular programs, there has been a division of teaching and learning. Part of it was done on online basis, and part of it was done in face-to-face or on-site basis. So this particular research that I'm citing here actually is a bit dated, 13 years old, but This research has been done on a sample of 300 Singaporean students who were studying in computer science. So they are IT and technology savvy, because when we talk about online education or online delivery of teaching and learning, there are people amongst both the educators and the students who actually have phobia from using technology, less likely with younger generations. However, the sample has focused on computer science students, so most of them are IT savvy. Nonetheless, they do not agree on fully online provision of the courses. But why was that? Because first of all, the main findings of that study was that face-to-face is more conducive to learning process. And when we talk about face-to-face, actually you can look at the person's face, you can see the gestures, you can see the unspoken language, you can see the gests and the hints that gives you affirmation, sometimes give you a hint that you're not on the right path in what you're saying. So the face-to-face interaction is very conducive to learning process. And then also it provides more opportunities, instant and on the spot, to seek help and clarification, whether during like workshops or during lectures that has a limited number of students. I'm not talking about a lecture theater, the ones that we have here in Edinburgh, whereby you have 110 students. Students won't be able to ask questions in this kind of layout. But I'm talking about lectures that has more specific focus on 30 to 40 students. There is an opportunity for an instant and on-spot seeking help and clarification. And this idea of the fact that face-to-face interaction is more interactive, the social interactive are crucial to positive learning experiences. But also there is the cultural preferences. Most of us know that within the Eastern culture, the Asian versus the Western learning and teaching modes, there is more reliance on a face-to-face interaction, because in some of the Asian cultures, the teacher is considered to be a role model, not just a person who imparts knowledge that could be taken out of Google or the modules or the MOOCs. Now, in terms of my personal reflections on my provision of the formative feedback about the weekly workshop tasks, I'm going to explain the teaching context in brief. I have 25 master students. All of them are international students, and the majority come from China. The workshop layout, 2 hours per week of actual contact with students. Tutors were offered the opportunity to set synchronous or asynchronous or a mix of the two. Now, the course organizer also followed a flipped classroom course design. Students were assigned readings. They attend recorded lectures of approximately an hour. And then also the course organizer decided for the main task students need to accomplish in learning groups. So students were divided into 5 or 4 students for each group, and they have to collectively accomplish a task and post it on Learn. Students were also required to submit 5 reflective blogs individually, and these blogs were due on deadlines, post the lecture attendance, about the teaching theories and approaches they are introduced to through the readings. Tutors were also required to support student learning through providing feedback on their tasks, blogs, and answer their questions. So what is reflective practice actually? It is a process of self-evaluation and assessment of what teachers do in their classroom and the extent to which these practices support student learning. And why I find this is very important, because we do have discussions in our tutor group for an ongoing professional development. And I invite you, and I would appreciate any comment or any hint or any advice after I finish my presentation. So actually, what is it that I have done? I decided for asynchronous mode. The asynchronous mode could be summarized by actually students have to do submissions and you give them feedback without having a face-to-face meetings. So it's not in the same time. So submission deadline were not always met. And that was a problematic with, sometimes with the system, sometimes the learn system was down and broke. And that was the deadlines, even for some of the guest speakers and lecturers to have the lecture live on that specific particular date every week, sometimes was not met. And so when you see that sometimes the system or the technology fails the instructor, you have also to understand that some students are actually based in China, in some far provinces. They might have problems with the internet and their broadband or bad connections. So although we have agreed as a team on the deadlines, I felt that I have to be more flexible with students not meeting the deadlines of the weekly submissions. That's one point. The other thing, the instructions on the weekly task were sometimes in need of more clarification. And so I find that it's important to send my workshop groups clarification of what is needed for them to do, and giving tips. I also had to sometimes even give them tips on learning skills, how to handle the co-reading, how to divide the tasks. So all of these were included into the emails. Normally, when you are teaching on site and on face-to-face, you can have these discussions without keep sending emails to each group or solving the student's problem back and forth, because they have an issue with one of their colleagues. This colleague is not turning up to the meeting. All of these would have been solved if we had on-site like workshops. And again, the importance of face-to-face interaction. It saves time. You can explain what is needed. You can simplify the task based on students' level. You can differentiate. You can give cues and support understanding. All of these actually were missing because of having an asynchronous mode of learning and teaching. So the effect, again, the effect on quality of the delivery, the amount and the quality of feedback during the process of learning. Now, I'm going to give you my own experience, and some of the other tutors chose not to give feedback for each blog. You know, when you have 25 students, each of them had to submit 400 words on a weekly basis. And you feel that these actually blogs were not assessed immediately. So they were not part of an instant summative assessment, but they should be critically reflected upon as part of their final summative assessment. So they have to reflect on the progression of their development of understanding of theories of teaching at the end, writing essay. So these blogs will then be used critically. So I felt that I needed to give them feedback. And as a formative assessment feedback, I would write 100 to 250 words approximately for each student. Of course, you can imagine the amount of time if you want to invest in writing 250 words for each student every week. I would spend like the weekend literally writing feedback for students. Now I'm talking about another workshop, which was, I chose to have a synchronous workshop. I had 20 students, the attendance was optional. However, the policy of the university does not encourage recording of the sessions. Students nonetheless rarely miss the classes. I've never taken any register. Students have their attendance has shown me their preferences to the face-to-face rather than the asynchronous. I would make sure that I provide the feedback, again formative, on reading related tasks before the workshop. And now this actually ties with Professor Michael's point that the feedback, when the feedback is done in a timely manner, this helps students understand what they need to do, or how they need to improve, or how they need to broaden their understanding of these open-ended questions. So again, my reflection that students would come back clarifying. So because of this toing and froing, because of the lack of face interaction, when you write a feedback to students asking them, why don't you look at this? What about this? Why do you think, I mean, I wouldn't say a right or wrong. I wouldn't give any student that your answer was wrong, because this is not part of a constructive feedback. The constructive critical feedback is to help students broaden their understanding. So you would always, my thinking, I mean, I'm happy to hear from Professor Michael, to give them, to be a facilitator of knowledge and to be playing the devil advocate role. So why do you think this is right? What about that? So students would come back, because actually, if you look back at the culture of learning that they've had for 20 years before joining this master program, whether there exists any feedback in their previous context, and whether the feedback was principally corrective, so right or wrong, or do it this way or don't do it that way, or whether the feedback was actually constructive to help them think differently and develop the life learning skills and critical thinking. So students would come back clarifying why they said that and ask more guidance. And sometimes the dialogue would be missed. The interactive element of the dialogue, they take your comment as though you are correcting them, not as though you are telling them, why don't you think it the other way? So, and they will start sending emails, and students will start asking you to be offered opportunity to rewrite and resubmit. And if you look at this from a fairness perspective, the practicality of this, that's number one. Time-wise, number two. The other thing is, this is against course regulation, because other students in other workshop groups were not offered this opportunity. So you wouldn't allow students to rewrite or resubmit. But again, this idea of online feedback and all of the activities that are happening online, they kind of, to an extent, does not support learning. That is my observation from my own students. So the final assignment, they have to submit a written essay. Students came with massive questions, seeking clarifications on what is needed to be done. So we as tutors suggested an option, but recorded Q&A live session where the course organizers answered students' questions. It was difficult to attain given the number of enrolled students, because this particular course serves students from different programs within the School of Education. So we have more than 200 students enrolled in this particular course or program module. Nonetheless, I have offered a session to discuss possible Q&A with students and provide ample evidence and guidance on what needed to be done. Nonetheless, students will keep coming back seeking guidance on specific questions in relation to their submission. And I've also had students asking me if I'm happy to read some segments of their essays, which is against the regulation as well, because students still have issues with understanding sometimes what is needed to be done. So I would say that this has an effect on students' motivation. The delay in answering questions, inquiries, or feedback causes anxiety to some students and stress, and it impacts on their motivations. And sometimes you need a more clarification on the email sent, because the student's language sometimes is a bit tricky, or sometimes is not clear enough, and you are, what is it that they are trying to ask? And you are giving them different scenarios. If this is what you mean, then this is the answer. And if this is what you mean, then this is the answer. But again, there has been this kind of lack of communication. So on the online synchronous sessions, encouraging students to participate in discussion was not always met by interaction. And we need to understand that within different cultures, I'm talking about, for example, in the West, students are more like open to be challenged and to challenge the tutor. But when you have students coming from the East or some Eastern cultures, they look up at the tutor or the instructor or their educator to the extent that they don't think that challenging their opinion is right. So they don't want actually to, they follow what is called the face-saving culture. So I've been struggling to encourage students to participate. They have discussed a lot the idea of digital communities of practice, but this online digital communities is has a lot of challenges within higher education, and it's not very easy to attain. Having students attending an online meeting, Zoom, Teams, Google Meet doesn't necessarily mean that they are ready to contribute to a discussion. Only a few students would engage in responding to questions and discussions. Students were more focused on receiving answers for questions rather than engaging in open discussions. Although I have made it very clear for them that there is no right or wrong answers. And yet they were actually more focused on the learning style. So if they ask a question, they need to get an answer, a precise answer for that question, even though there should not be a precise answer for that question. And that's what is academia all about. And nonetheless, and this is not only my case, I've been discussing this with other tutors across the modules, the emails tutors received post the workshop, and the main message of students is that they did not want to participate in order not to look stupid in front of others. And this is one of the backdrops of online education, whereby if we have like workshop groups and you divide students into group, and the tutor is able actually to walk into the room and have a discussion with each group, students will not feel the embarrassment of having to speak up in front of 25 students. Nonetheless, I've also noticed that sometimes student silence during workshop does not necessarily mean they were disengaged. And that is very important observation for my current actually research I'm developing with one of my colleagues. I would be frustrated because I thought that I was the only one speaking and they are listening, and that is not the purpose of workshops. Despite I would always encourage them, and I would provide hints to the lecture slides and previous lectures, and to help them connect or like link different concepts to previous concepts. Nonetheless, some of them would send emails thanking me for clarification, although I can't recall that I've clarified any concept, but they would mention that when we discussed that point with that particular student, it made sense to their understanding, so it clarified their understanding. So there is a difference between disengagement versus attention. So sometimes you think that students actually are not engaged, but they are listening and they are giving you their full attention. So I think here comes the learning preferences of some students in some different cultures. Being quiet is tricky, doesn't necessarily mean that they are not engaged or they are disengaged. The question here for educators is how much educators need to spend time after their online sessions, because if you keep responding to emails, the sessions are supposed to allow students the opportunity to engage and ask questions and clarify misunderstandings about the readings, about the lecture they've watched. Nonetheless, when students remain quiet during the workshop and then they start sending you questions by email, asking you to answer this or clarify this, how much time are you able to afford to answer individual emails on that sense? So I think I'm going now to say just when you as an educator try to provide formative feedback on their task about their readings, which is 400 words before the workshop, has increased their engagement and has actually helped them write in a better manner in their final assignment. And actually I've just finished marking today and uploaded all their marks online. but it meant more effort on the teacher's end, which is not obligatory for the teachers to provide feedback, but just to give a mark for each workshop, that was our obligation as teachers. But I felt that giving students feedback would help them understand what they need, go read again what they need to read again, or go focus on another piece of reading that they need to do in order to better understand that particular concept. I'm going actually to move on to my final thoughts. My observation from my students is that students at best, they were not quite satisfied, and at worst, they were unsatisfied by the online teaching and learning. Emails about anxiety and stress were sent. I mean, I would receive emails about anxiety and stress, although within the British systems, and particularly within our university system, we have certain channels whereby students should contact in case they have like anxiety, well-being issues, the advice place, their personal tutor. However, when students send you emails and you're not their personal tutor, it tells a lot about the amount of anxiety and stress they are going through. And as a tutor who feels that they are responsible for the well-being of their students, you get engaged and you need to tailor the advice. But how feasible is this with other tutors, particularly those who are not willing to invest a lot with students? I've arranged and delivered some free online sessions to help students plan their submissions, to help to explain their marking criteria, to go through written examples, to advise on academic writing and study skills and group work. But all of these extracurricular activities are not considered to be part of the workload of teachers and educators in higher education. So what I would say, actually, we as educators need to rebalance our engagement in supporting students for reasons, but also it affects us. It affects us stressfully. If you are always immediate to students, that means that you will spend time and a lot of hours responding to emails. And I've had some colleagues saying that we don't need to have to go through this. But also it goes down to the teacher's philosophy, whether you have a humanistic approach, whether you perceive your role in academia as principally to support students, or you just want to impart the knowledge and get your salary. And this is also, I would like to end by this, and thank you for listening.